Hi there, Michelle here from McQuaid TV. We're helping you find ways to move from functioning to flourishing by putting the latest science to the real-world test. Today I'm very pleased to be able to introduce you to Lucy Hone. Lucy's a fellow Masters of Positive Psychology graduate from the University of Pennsylvania, and she's just submitted her PhD through AUT University's Human Potential Centre, and her work focuses on ways to apply research to promote mass market wellbeing in real-world contexts. Based in Christchurch, New Zealand, she worked closely with several key organisations in the post-quake environment to promote resilience and effective psychological recovery. She's currently helping a number of New Zealand schools develop wellbeing and resilience strategies and is a facilitator for the Mental Health Education Resource Centre. She's published research in the Journal of Positive Psychology, Social Indicators Research and the International Journal of Wellbeing, and as a mother of three, married to a stressed Christchurch builder, Lucy knows what it's like to juggle work, family, community, social and wellbeing commitments. Welcome, Lucy.
Hi Michelle, lovely to be with you today.
Oh, I'm so pleased you made the time. I know how busy you are, but I also saw recently you published a great piece of research that I think's really been missing in the field around the importance of flourishing at work. And we talk around here a lot about flourishing, but I think it's often a bit of a misunderstood concept. So can you just help us at the outset, what is flourishing exactly and why might it be beneficial for us in workplaces based on the things you've been finding?
Okay, well, let me start by saying that is just the perfect question to ask me. My PhD was exactly on that topic because it occurred to me as I started reading through the research that very often I was coming across different people, different research teams' models of flourishing, and it seemed to me there wasn't actually any consensus on what we actually mean by flourishing. So my PhD has been about understanding, measuring and promoting high levels of well-being, which we call flourishing. So to get more precise and a little bit more academic, what we have found is there are lots of different models of well-being. The one that I have used in this particular research paper comes from Felicia Huppert and Timothy So from the University of Cambridge. And I like their model because firstly, they define well-being as feeling good and functioning well. And in my business, and I'm sure in yours and with lots of your listeners, what happens is that people can get really strung up on the language of positive psychology. And I have found that nobody really can ever think of a good argument as to why they wouldn't want to feel good and function well. I think we can all universally agree that that's a pretty good aspiration. So then what happens is that we unpack that feeling good and flourishing well by saying that you have to fulfill certain criteria to be categorized as flourishing. So for instance, you have got to score highly on a survey to say that you do have a positive life appraisal. So in this particular model I'm talking about, the Huppert and So model, they have three criteria for flourishing. One is that you have to score highly on your positive appraisal, which means that you would classify your life as going well. So you've got high life satisfaction. You would say that you were happy. So that's criteria one. The second is that you display positive characteristics. And by that, I mean that you are resilient, maybe optimistic, you display vitality. So there are different components in the characteristic part. And then finally, the third part is positive functioning. And by that, what we mean is that we are fully engaged, we're competent, we have autonomy. So they have a list of 10 criteria for flourishing. And what we just mean by flourishing is the high levels of well-being. And what I did with my research, as part of my PhD, I was really lucky to have a massive data set, to have access to this data set that was a well-being survey with lots of different questions in it, which we gave to 10,000 New Zealanders.
Wow. That's a big sample.
So I'm really fortunate to be in the right place at the right time. And why that is so important is that quite often as psychologists, we might conduct a cross-sectional survey on a bunch of workers, but quite often we would only be able to get access to 50 workers or 150 or maybe even 450 if we were really lucky. Whereas in my work, I managed to get hold of this data set, which crucially is a fully representative sample of all adult New Zealanders. So we can compare our demographics to the New Zealand census and show that actually the conclusions that we draw from this research are representative of all adult New Zealanders, which makes it really exciting.
It's kind of a researcher's dream, right?
It's a researcher's dream. So, yeah, when I joined the Human Potential Centre, they were called the Centre for Physical Activity and Nutrition, but I was really attracted to the way they worked, and they're very cross-disciplined, and I really like that. You know, they're not stuck in single academic silos, but really interested in looking at how people flourish across different domains of their life. And so we then started working on this dream of having New Zealand's first wellbeing index, and Sovereign came on board, and so we have this incredible research tool of 10,000 participants. So for this study I took the workers, which was 5,000 New Zealand adults who were in paid employment, and what we did was looked at the different variables, the different answers they had given across physical health determinants and psychosocial responses and behaviours, and worked out what did you have to do to get into that flourishing group. So interesting for us, we had 25% of people were flourishing.
Yeah. And that's sort of representative, isn't it? Pretty much we've seen in other world statistics that that's quite common, that most of us are kind of functioning, we're getting by, but we're not really tipping to that feeling good, functioning well state that you were describing. So of those who are feeling good and functioning well, what did you find set them apart? Like, what are they doing differently that allows them to access that state?
Okay, so there were some really fascinating insights. And I guess for me, one of the things that astounded me most was that those respondents who said that they really were aware of their strengths were 9 times more likely to be flourishing than those that said they didn't really know their strengths. So that was fascinating. But what really blew my mind was that we then asked them another question, and those that responded that they used their strengths, that gave a really strong response to that question, they were 18 times more likely to be in that flourishing category. So we can see, and you and I know this, and there has been other pieces of evidence to indicate that strength awareness is really important, but actually we need to use them. And this is just so fantastic to get these kind of numbers backing up this knowledge. So now we do really know that for workers, if you want to flourish, you've got to use your strengths.
What else did you find for workers? Because I know there were some other really interesting pieces. So strengths there, absolutely. From memory, the data also suggested something amazing around appreciation. Is that right?
Absolutely. So if you felt appreciated by others, you were 30 times more likely to be in that flourishing group.
That is incredible.
And, you know, I think what's so great about these kind of research studies is that they back up empirically what we intuitively and instinctively know. You know, we know, you and I know that being validated, someone's saying to me, hey, I really love the way you thought through your strategy for that piece of research, you know, with some precise validation. It goes a long way, and it's so much more valuable to me than another, you know, $10,000 or something.
It goes a huge way, and I think we just underestimate that deep psychological need we all share to be respected, valued and appreciated, which is why a little bit of gratitude, as you're suggesting, is so valuable. And we've been seeing in some of the other strengths researchers that, particularly as managers or leaders, if you can combine that gratitude with some reflection of the strengths people have been using, it's like double dividends for you, and it really really doesn't cost you anything. It only takes a few seconds to do. I think it's got to be one of the most underutilized strategies we have in businesses around human performance. What else did you find? Because I know you were testing some of the great research that some of the researchers in the UK have led out around the 5 ways to wellbeing, and that the New Zealand government's been adopting and teaching people as well. But I also think this was one of the first times you'd actually tested perhaps how different parts of the 5 ways might have more impact than others on people. So for those who aren't familiar with the 5 ways, perhaps can you talk us quickly through what they are? If you can remember them, I always get about 4 and forget the 5th. But also in particular what you found, sort of had perhaps more impact on flourishing at work out of those approaches.
Absolutely. So the 5 ways to wellbeing came from a big piece of research that they did at the New Economics Foundation in the UK. And then when we had our earthquakes here in Christchurch, New Zealand, and I'm not sure how many of your viewers will know that, but to give you a very quick picture, in February 2011, so now almost, where are we, just 6 years ago, we had a devastating earthquake right close to our CBD. So we lost 180 people and 70% of the buildings in the CBD came down. So here we are 5 years later, and we are still a city in complete disarray. We're still taking buildings down. I mean, it takes a long time when your whole CBD comes down. So, and what I didn't understand about earthquakes before I lived through them is that you don't just get one. So you get a series of really damaging aftershocks. So we had over 50 earthquakes in a 2-year period that measured over 5 on the Richter scale. So we've really had to learn to live with being resilient, and I've learned so much more about real-time resilience, and taking it out of that kind of academic perspective and really taking it to the streets. So what happened around that time was that the Mental Health Foundation in New Zealand created this fantastic positive psychology-inspired public health campaign using the 5 ways to wellbeing to really drum home the simple messages that as the average person, there is so much we can do to boost our own well-being. So we were really lucky in Christchurch because we got absolutely exposed with that campaign. So for us here, we probably are more familiar with the 5 ways to well-being as a city than any city in the world. So they are, and the point of these 5 ways is that they're really simple messages that people can broadly interpret to their own needs. So they are to connect, meaning that you need your strong, supportive relationships. They are to be active. And I always read that can mean actively involved as well as physical activity. We need to keep learning. We need to give our time and ourselves. And we need to
take notice. That's the one I do remember.
So good. So as you can hear, they're really simple messages, but they have proved to be very powerful. And again, my research has backed this up empirically, that we found that all 5 of the 5 ways to wellbeing were strongly associated with flourishing. So you are much more likely to be in that flourishing group if you practiced these things often. And so, for instance, I can't quite remember which one was most strongly related, but I remember thinking that, so they were all about 3 times as likely to be in that group. I think
it was take notice and keep learning that were particularly high when I was looking
and
through
give,
it.
actually, that's the other thing.
Yeah, the volunteering was really high.
Yeah, and so I think this does have real implications for organisations. There is without doubt an opportunity here, because what I also know from my own professional practice is that companies sometimes find it really hard to motivate their employees to keep learning. So the kind of great connect here is that we've got these promotional messages, promotional public health messages, which are freely available from NEF. And now we've got the empirical research to show that they really do make a difference to your employees all around flourishing. So I think, that's a really important kind of missing piece of the jigsaw there that we provided. So, and it's easy to promote those things when you've got the messages all there.
It is, and they're simple. Again, these aren't big things. They're not things you need a lot of budget for. You don't even need a huge amount of permission. You could do these for yourself or in your own teams, was what I loved about them. And I really valued, throughout the report, you've written some really practical suggestions for companies to take away. And I think, 3 of those we've been talking about today is not just let people know their strengths, but help them use them, please. Give some feedback and appreciation. If you can make that strength focus, great, but just a little bit of appreciation goes a long way. And some of those ways to wellbeing, particularly that helping them to be perhaps more mindful and aware and taking notice, that curiosity and love of learning, and encouraging the volunteering I know you guys really drew out in the paper. But I also know, Lucy, and I get asked this a lot by some of the workplaces I'm in, is, well, that's all good and well when everything's kind of going along, but the example that you're talking there too, that Christchurch has been through in its own journey, and that lots of organisations, and we go through individually, where life has its highs and lows. And I know for you, having lost your own daughter in the last few years, you've certainly been travelling that path. So do you think these things translate to the challenging times as well as the good times? I mean, the New Zealand research would suggest perhaps, but do you think that's a unique case for New Zealand, or do you think that most of this translates in the challenging times as much as the good times? Can we be well when we're in those moments as much as we can when things are all coming together the way we want?
Okay, so I, of course, think that is a really fascinating question. And my daughter was killed in a car accident just over 18 months ago, 12-year-old daughter, and her best friend, and with her mother, who was one of my best friends. So it has been a devastating time for us. And I have been really fascinated to see which of my positive psychology and resilience strategies that I often recommend to others have really worked for me. And I've just started working, doing some research with the VIA. Does everyone know who the VIA are?
Most of them do. They hang around here enough. It's hard to avoid them.
Right. So Ryan over at the VIA in Cincinnati has going to start work. We're going to put a project together to assess the strengths that help us grieve. So I've also been commissioned to write a book fusing together my own resilience work with my personal experience. And I can tell you absolutely, Michelle, that my character strengths that I was aware of before have been really useful in this period. But actually, I used to be really low on forgiveness when I first started to do the VIA. I think it was about, 6 years ago. And I obviously rated my forgiveness really quite low down. I remember it was somewhere down at sort of 18. And it has absolutely fascinated me to discover that from the moment we were told that Abby had died, I've never felt any malice for the driver, and forgiveness, and we all felt very forgiving in our family, has changed our lives for us. We really, not bearing him any malice has really just given us a much more productive platform to move forward from. And I sit here with my love next. Can you get that the right way around?
Yeah, we've got it the right way around.
Because I have just learned that even through the pain and the jealousy of seeing my friends with their daughters, I actually truly love can conquer all. I have to do it intentionally. I really do have to reach out and think, okay, well, I can be miserable about this, which I am, but I also can't stay miserable. So I'm going to have to face those mothers and their daughters and spend time with them and really intentionally put love on the table. And I have found that the strengths has made a huge difference to me in this terrible time. So yeah, I think it's really universal.
And I think, last year, last year I lost my dad to cancer, and, so that had kind of been expected. But I know going through that grief cycle myself, how important those strengths were, because I think in those moments where you're just not sure if you can take the next step forward, knowing that there's something that you can still reach for or something good in you that you can draw upon, perhaps in those moments is just enough to edge you forward to the next step. And I do believe that while I certainly wouldn't have described myself as flourishing at all during that cycle of grief, much more functioning than flourishing, but I was also, I guess, aware enough and felt like my character strengths and some of those other skills we play with in positive psychology were really important in just keeping my head above that cycle of grief and being aware enough to know if I was slipping back to that languishing stage, how I got the help or what I needed to do to pull forward, and also knowing, and a completely different experience of grief than what you and your family have been going through, but also knowing that as the time has been right for me to step forward and feel like I can flourish a bit more again, that I'm able to do that as well. And so I do think that, I know the book that you're writing, it will be such a gift to the world, and I can't wait to talk to you more about it. I also know you've been helping kids figure out some cool stuff with their strength, and I know lots of parents watch these videos as well and think about ways to take this into their families. So do you want to show us the little research project you've got going with some girls, so in case people want to try this at home?
Yeah, absolutely. So we, in our department at the Human Potential Centre, we spend a lot of time, as I'm sure you do too, trying to work out cool ways to get these messages across. And if I've got 2 teenage boys now, so if I ask them to go online and do their strengths, really they would give me that withering, take your research away from here, mum, look. But fortunately I do get to work with some of the girls' schools here in Christchurch, and yesterday we have just run the leadership day for the final year of school, so the 17-year-old girls. We had 120 of them at Rangiruru, great Kiwi name school, which is the leading independent school in New Zealand, girls' school. And so what we got them to do was, first we got them to sit down and ponder for a few minutes to imagine themselves their best possible future selves, which is a rigorously scientifically validated exercise. So we know that we've got some good research around this intervention, that if you do sit down and take the time to write down your goals and imagine what your best possible future self would look like, then actually it really is the most brilliant exercise in hope. It helps us, order our ideas and our priorities, and it just gives us a kind of more logical progression to get to where we want to go. But what I really wanted to do was not just get them to write down their hopes, but I wanted to give them a sustainable, like a concrete artifact of hope to take home with them. So we created these fantastic, I don't know if you can see this,
we can.
Beautiful bottles. But so this is just a sample bottle, and we gave them, so they wrote the letters first, and then we gave them an empty wine bottle and a whole bunch of wool. And we had 120 girls sitting in a room, and they all wrapped their bottles. So very cleverly, their bottles were a fantastic illustration of the fact that they were as unique as each of the girls are. They were all so different. And then what we've done, which I think is the really critical bit here to make this exercise work, is they popped the letter inside, and then you probably won't be able to see this, but we have waxed the lid. And so we said to them, you girls take these home, take them off to university with you next year or wherever you end up, and don't open them until you're as old as we are. And what I'm really excited about, because I clearly am a bit of an academic nerd, is I have this great sort of fantasy dream that in 20 years from now, they will enable us to create this incredible longitudinal experiment where we can ask the girls, those that are willing, to give us the bottles back or to give us the letters back. And then, like the nerdy psychologist I can then code the entries. And so we can see how many of them wrote about hope or marriage or a profession or maybe living in a different country, or how many words that were about sort of reflecting positive emotional content and how many were negative. And then we can link those outcomes with the actually very real outcomes of their life by giving them a cross-sectional survey at the time. So I'm very excited that this might become a kind of modern day nuns study for those of you who are familiar with that study. So I have plans.
I think it's a great initiative, and I'm sure for other parents watching, this might be a great one to do with your kids on the weekend. I think, that best possible self-exercise is such an interesting way to just time travel forward. I tell my kids we're getting in the Back to the Future DeLorean and we're going forward. And so what do they want to be a year from now, and what will life look like? And then we seal those up and we have a look at them, a year later on New Year's Eve to see what happens. So it's quite a fun exercise to do.
Great idea, because we're always looking for a sort of equivalent of this for the boys, and we haven't quite cracked that yet. Whether we do a football or a treasure chest, depending how old they are. So if any of your viewers have got some better ideas,
send them in. Fantastic. Well, Lucy, thank you so much for your time and for the research you're putting into the world. We can't wait to see what you're studying next.
Oh, thanks, Michelle, and to all of your viewers. It's just been great coming to talk to you all the way from New Zealand. Thank you.
And thank you for watching. And if you're looking for more ways to connect with Lucy's wonderful research and work, then check out the websites appearing on the screen below you, 100%project.co.nz, or Lucy's own personal blog at onewildandpreciouslife.com. And of course, if you're looking for other tested practical ways you can move from functioning to flourishing at work, stop on by michellemcquaid.com. Make sure you register your name and email address so you can hear all our news first. Remember, you are good enough, so don't be afraid to let your light shine. Until next time, take care.